Hello, my name is Chanel Grenaway, and I'm a racial and gender equity facilitator and coach. I'm happy to be your guide as we delve deeper into practices that can help build equitable, inclusive, and diverse boards and leadership teams. Today, we're going to talk about inclusive recruitment strategies. So we're going to be looking at promising practices that can help increase organizational inclusivity as well as community representation on leadership teams and on board and around board tables. To begin with, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. I do believe that land acknowledgements are tools that we can use to disrupt the status quo. And definitely a lot of the work that we do around diversity, equity, and inclusion is really about disrupting that status quo. In this video that I'm sharing, Stephen Paquette is speaking to us and inviting us to expand our land acknowledgements and use this as a moment to reflect on and think about the relationships that we have, not only with the land, but also with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. He's inviting us to think also about how we are stewarding the land. And again, what's our relationship to the air, the water, animals, and nature. So as you think, or as you listen to the land acknowledgement, I do invite you to reflect upon the questions that Stephen is asking.
What I've learned from my elders is that when we do acknowledgement of the land, it's not about acknowledging whose land it belongs to, because that indigenous worldview, we never owned the land. We were simply caretakers of it for future generations. And what I've been taught from my elders is that when we do that acknowledgement of the land, it's much more than just the territory. It's about relationships. It's about our relationships with people that share the land. It's our relationships with Mother Earth. It's our relationships with the four-legged, the finned, the feathered, the crawlers, the original stewards of Mother Earth. It's that relationship that we acknowledge with the trees. It's that acknowledgement that we have with the plant life that is part of the food chain and helps us exist. It gives us our medicines for healing, gives us food for nutrients, it gives us our medicines for ceremonies. We acknowledge water. Water is sacred, water is life. And what we're told is that when we acknowledge that water, that we always have to acknowledge the carriers of those teachings, which are the women. So we do that in the same voice. We also acknowledge the infinite wisdom of the grandfathers. Then we take that to the next level, is which acknowledging that relationship that we have with father-son, or in some nations, brother-son. We acknowledge that relationship that we have with Nokomis, Grandma Moon, and how she cleanses Mother Earth. We acknowledge that relationship that we have with our distant relations, the star people. So when we talk about acknowledging the land, it's so much more so than just acknowledging what nation was on that. As we know all throughout the history of Turtle Island, is that indigenous people were, for the most part, nomadic people. They shifted. They would move from season to season. It just so happens that Sheridan sits on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, which I'm very proud to always share and educate with people. But in the same breath, I also acknowledge that many, many other nations have walked this territory, and that their ancestors are still here amongst us.
So with that land acknowledgement, I hope you again took a little time, took a little pause to think about two things, really, again, how you might use land acknowledgements to ground your meetings, to start your meetings in a place of truth, reconciliation, and equity. Try again. Let's try again. Take 4. So with that land acknowledgement, I hope you took some time to reflect and pause and think again about the relationships you currently have. Again, it could be relationships in your home, at work, and in your community. A big part of recruitment and onboarding strategies, in fact, is also about building trust and building strong relationships so that you do have people that you can call upon to invite into your organizations who can also lend their diversity of expertise and lived experience to help you support your mission and vision. Today, we're going to be talking about what practices that we can think about piloting or testing that brings us closer to the goals related to the 50-30 challenge. Again, the challenge is asking organizations to work towards two goals. One is gender parity, so 50% women and or non-binary people on boards or leadership teams. And the second goal is enhanced representation. 30% equity deserving groups on boards and leadership teams. So yeah, we're going to sort of look at what's currently happening, and I'll give you an opportunity to think about what you're doing and what's working and maybe what's not working. We're going to look at some promising practices, and then we're going to share some examples. And again, throughout the session, I'll be pausing, asking questions, and inviting you to pause, actually, to think about, again, what you're doing and what you might want to try or delve into a little bit further. Please remember that this module has an accompanying worksheet as well as a resource sheet with lots of additional resources, some that I might reference today. And the worksheet also has some additional questions that you can consider. So definitely feel free to have a pen and paper handy and or to follow along using the worksheet that's provided. So let's get started. So we're starting with looking at board and leadership recruitment and what we're seeing and hearing. So, the reason why the 50-30 challenge, is in existence is because there is still a lot of work that needs to be done in many sectors, I would say in all sectors, in order to create greater equity, greater opportunity of access to leadership positions and to board positions, as well as what I see as a opportunity to create stronger boards and stronger leadership teams by having a diversity of experiences, particularly experiences that represent the communities that we live in. So we do need to, there is a need to, and what we've been hearing from a variety of leaders and teams, board chairs, is that it is important that we do a review of recruitment policies and practices to address barriers, to address unexamined biases that are inherent in our processes. It's important to look at language and how we are communicating when we put out a call for board members, and or when we put out a call for new members to our leadership teams or to our organizations in general. Some of the things we need to think about, are criteria that are built into our recruitment policies. Are there barriers based on that criteria? One of the things that organizations are really now looking at and really exploring is ideas of education, work experience, and how they are, again, communicated in job ads or in volunteer ads or calls for volunteers. Words like, how much previous board experience do you need? Why is it set up? It might, 5 years or more. sometimes the term Canadian experience appears in our communications materials. What do you really mean by that? And is that really necessary? Again, who are you excluding when you use terms like, and you have criteria like Canadian experience? So these are the questions that leaders and board chairs are having. And I think they're, again, really good points of exploration as you're reviewing your recruitment policies. It's important to note that this work takes time and this work needs time. And the reason for that is that we're building relationships. We're also, in some cases, building trust with new communities that we haven't yet engaged in a deep way. So you do have to build in sort of that runway of time needed to, again, build that trust, make the connections, build relationships. You need time as well to get to know, the diversity of community members that you might want to engage with. As much as you are introducing yourself to them and introducing your organization and your mission to them, you're also taking the time to get to know your community members, the diversity of lived experiences, their needs, and their maybe what they need in order to fully participate in your organization as a volunteer. I think it's also important to note that we currently are seeing that organizations that are looking to reach equity deserving groups often don't have the existing networks or relationships with community to build upon. And so that is what I would say one of the first steps that I often start with when working with leaders. Where are those missed opportunities for that engagement, and how can we rectify that? If you don't see anyone around your board tables, or if there is, again, that lack of diversity around your board tables, and you don't see many who reflect the communities you serve, how do you start to change that, and how do you start to build that? And again, one of the ways is by diversifying your networks and building your community relationships, your relationships with equity deserving groups. I think the other part of what we're hearing and what we're seeing in terms of the work is that we do need to examine our biases. We do need to ask questions related to who holds the power, who holds the privilege in these spaces. We also do need to ask, what is valued? Again, what is valued in terms of expertise, lived experience, educational background, and why? Why are those particular things valued? Why is, maybe a particular, be it a Western education, is that really what you're looking for? And is that really what you need? And again, why is that the one that's valued? So looking at, again, unexamined biases in the process, what and whose values are being privileged, who's a part of the process. As much as possible, you also do want a diverse nomination committee involved, and you do want to, again, try different practices in order to reduce, minimize, and hopefully eliminate bias within the process. So I'm going to give you a pause moment for you to also think about your particular context and your particular work, and think about maybe, again, what's working and what you might want to explore in terms of board and leadership recruitment. So this is just at the very beginning, beginning reflection point. We're probably going to be returning to your list that you come up with here, because again, as we journey together and as we learn about more promising practices, there might be more ideas that you want to add to your list. But yeah, take 5 minutes or so and please feel free to jot down, again, what you think is working for you, and maybe think about the impacts that you have. You might also want to make any notes regarding, again, your current leadership makeup as well as your board makeup, and challenge yourself in terms of, who is missing, who would we like to invite here. and any ideas that you have right now in terms of questions that you need to explore. Okay, so with that list that you have generated, like I said, we'll likely return to that list as we continue to delve into promising practices. So you might add to that list, you might prioritize that list. So definitely keep that handy. As I mentioned at the top, a big part of gender equity, diversity, and inclusion work is about disrupting, challenging the status quo. And it's about really finding ways in our daily lives, in our daily work lives, that we can disrupt our default ways of working. I'm going to share a video that highlights an organization that is doing just that. That, they're taking the time to question the way they do things, and not only to question and explore the way they do things, but they're also taking it to the next level of, well, why don't we test pilot a new way of doing something? Why don't we remove a barrier and see what feedback we get from community? Let's see what impact that creates. So I want to share this video as a way of inspiring you to think about how you might apply practices that shift the status quo related to recruitment. This video is an example from Food Share Toronto. It talks about how they are now paying people for their interviews, so paying people to come in to participate in an interview, recognizing that it does take time to prepare for an interview. So this is a policy that they are doing. They also talk about sharing interview questions in advance of a meeting, again, to set everyone up in the best possible way in terms of that interview. And in general, they really just, again, took that pause and really thought about how can we be flexible? How can we, again, make the interview process for staff, and I imagine, maybe for other areas of work, how can they make this interview process as equitable to everyone who, again, would like to be involved with their organization. So yeah, I'll share this video and then we can regroup.
When it comes to job interviews, we all know the preparation and travel time that goes into one. So in recognition of that, the head of Food Share Toronto, a community organization dedicated to food justice, says they will now be paying people who are selected to come in for interviews. As the country recovers from the effects of COVID-19 and continues to see a shifting workforce, Paul Taylor says his organization is bucking a trend.
We're not seeing the same kind of turnover that I hear a lot of other businesses and organizations are seeing.
He credits more progressive policies like paying a living wage of at least $24 an hour and capping the highest paid salary relative to what the lowest wage employee makes. But as of March 1st, another policy approved by Food Share Toronto's board aimed at helping workers, compensating job applicants for time related to interviews.
When you prepare for an interview, that is labor. It's labor that we feel employers have been expecting candidates to pay for a long time. And that's kind of outrageous, especially when you think about in those situations, who has more resources, who has more power.
He points to the cost of maybe taking time off work, paying for childcare, and spending time preparing for an interview, adding the organization sends all their questions at least 2 days ahead.
So from an equity perspective, folks who have already been made vulnerable by systems and public policies, this is going to help to advantage those folks a little bit, or at least eliminate and challenge some of the disadvantage by recognizing that there are costs.
If this sounds new to you, you're not alone.
This policy allows, I believe, will be a greater pool of applicants who can consider applying for positions while recognizing that their time will be compensated.
Dr. Tricia Williams at the Future Skills Center says this type of policy isn't widespread yet, She says she's eager to see the results of it and adds it serves as a powerful signal.
I think this is part of a larger shift we're seeing in the labor market right now, where there is more power to applicants and to employees and recognizing the value of the time they're investing in the process.
Dr. Michael Holinsky at the Ted Rogers School of Management says traditionally some employers have just compensated for direct expenses. He questions if this type of policy would catch on broadly.
So in one way, you're being paid to practice for your future employment. So I don't know whether it'll completely catch on as a practice in the full picture, in the big picture. However, if it's really helping organizations get people in the door to be interviewed, then why not?
Meanwhile, Taylor says he hopes his organization's message is one that resonates with prospective employees.
This is just the tip of the iceberg. We have worked together as our team to kind of think about what's possible. Let's dream in color.
For more on this story, go to citynews.ca. In Toronto for City News, I'm Nick Westall.
Okay, so I hope that video did inspire you and did demonstrate that with careful exploration, asking of really strong equity-centered questions, of really centering those that you're trying to invite into your organization, that you can make changes, and that policies and practices, ways that we've done things, the interview, pretty much we know what it traditionally looks like. We know what the application process looks like, the interview process, and we know kind of, again, what comes at the end. That process has been pretty standardized, within many sectors for many years. What Food Share Toronto has done, they've changed things up, and they've centered those that they want to invite in. They've centered the interviewee, and they've looked at things from their perspective. They're valuing, again, the time it took to prepare for the interview, the time it took to participate in the interview. They're valuing, again, what's happening in the lives of that person, and they're being flexible, and they're, again, recognizing their time and effort through an honorarium payment. Again, I share that as a way of saying things can change, and we can do things differently. I think the first place to start when we are thinking about interrupting the status quo is really starting by asking yourself and, putting a team together, and it might be the nominating committee, or it might be someone in your HR team, or again, just a small team who's doing sort of the hiring. Put a team together and think about some key questions that you want to explore as you're developing your recruitment process. So, some of those questions might be, do you know your recruitment needs and objectives? Sometimes boards will have a board matrix, which outlines the demographics, the skills, the attributes of their existing board team. And by looking at that, you can get a sense of what are some of the gaps, or who, what type of lived experience, what type of background, who's missing in terms of a community perspective from your board table. I always say a represented table is still underrepresented. That's because, again, with board tables, you might have a board of, 12 to 20. And even then, you're still not going to get the 100% community representation, that exists. What you're going to be doing in any given recruitment process is doing your best to fill in some of those diversity gaps, knowing that, again, it's not going to be 100%, but you're trying to improve upon what's already there. You're trying to fill in a gap. So that's something to consider. It's not going to be perfect every time, but I think setting out those goals, setting out those objectives, having a conversation, again, about the organizational needs, and again, who might be able to bring that into the organization, I think is a great question to start with. So related to those questions are, who is currently on your board and on your leadership team, what expertise and or lived experience would add value to your organization. Another question is, who are the equity deserving groups? and communities where you operate. So taking a look at, again, who is in your community and who are the equity deserving groups in your community. That changes over time. So again, every 3 years or so, every 3 to 4 years, it's good to take a pulse of that. And then once you get that data, ask yourself the question, are we representative of the communities that we serve? Gathering data and setting out some recruitment goals or priorities can really help to inform both the recruitment process, your outreach process, as well as communications that you share regarding your recruitment needs. So on this slide, the slide was developed by BC Co-op Association, and again, has some questions that you can refer to later on. But basically, they've outlined that the recruitment process really starts, particularly for on the board side, really starts with an examination of your existing board of directors. It starts with, again, the nomination committee asking these questions, and again, it starts with outlining, what a process will look like. There is, though, up and down engagement with the executive director, with management, and with existing staff, and ultimately your members, because it's through your members that you're reaching out to and inviting in. So that communication is key. And I always think that everyone should be involved in the recruitment process, maybe not as directly as those on the nominating committee, for example, but everyone should be aware that, we are looking for new board members. This is who we're looking for. Who do I know in my community? And sometimes for groups that don't have a strong network yet with equity deserving groups, sometimes it's relying on the diversity of people within your staff team or your management team to start to build those relationships, so they can actually also be quote unquote recruiters for you. So we'll move on, and we're going to be covering what I would say are sort of 3 key areas of, I'll switch back to this slide, 3 key areas of recruitment strategies that I think, again, are really good places to start when either reviewing what you're currently doing or when starting a new process. So I've titled them Inclusive Recruitment Strategies, the 3 Ps. So hopefully it makes it easy for you to remember. We're focusing on people. We're focusing on a review of policy and practices, process and policies, and we're focusing in on the preconditions for success. And so I'll just review these and then on a high level, and then we'll kind of delve deeper into them in terms of what does it mean to actually create a people practice, a process and policy practice, and what do practices related to setting up preconditions for success, what does that look like? So when you're thinking about recruitment, really, what are we thinking about? We're thinking about people, right? We're inviting people into our board tables and into our organizations, and it could be 2 leadership teams or it could be two management teams. To invite people in, it is, as mentioned at the top, it is about building trust. It's about building deeper connections and deeper relationships. So this is, again, a caution that this work does take time, but that you can see results incrementally over time. So to me, as soon as you start to ask these questions and build those relationships, there's the potential to, again, see some immediate short-term impacts. But the more you invest in learning about your community and building the trust and engaging with a diversity of community groups, the more you're accelerating the potential of, again, bringing in equity deserving groups to your board tables and into your co-ops as members. When we talk about policies and processes, we're really looking at, what can we do in terms of our process to make it as accessible, as easy for someone to consider the opportunity, as possible? How can we make it easy for them not only to consider, but to put in an application, to have that conversation, to engage? When we're looking at policies, likewise, we're looking at how our existing policies are either hindering or creating an opportunity for equity deserving groups to again engage with the organization. So process and policy reviews from an equity lens, from a gender equity lens, from a racial equity lens, are really important. You don't want to be inviting people in, but then have a policy or a criteria or a practice that again creates a roadblock. In today's day and age, there's so many places where people can spend their time and share their expertise. And everyone is, busy, and everyone, I think, is mindful of where they do want to spend their time and their energy. So if there is a roadblock and if there are any red flags, if anyone feels that, oh, I'm not really sure I'm going to be welcomed into this space, or I'm not sure my expertise is going to be valued, they might choose to go elsewhere. They might, they might just stop the process and say, this is not for me. This is not the right time. This is not the place that I'm going to feel valued. So again, having a ongoing review of your process and your policies can again help to eliminate any barriers to entry. The third one there, preconditions for success. This is really about, how are you, again, on an ongoing and consistent basis, building and fostering an inclusive culture. So as a organization, as a co-op, you have a reputation, right? People know about you, and even those that don't know about you, they will find out about you. If you do introduce yourself, at some point, they're likely to be looking at your website to gain more information about your co-op or your organization. They might be speaking to someone and asking them about their experience with your organization. So you do want to ensure that, quote unquote, your house is in order. You do want to ensure that you do have a strong reputation in the community where people are speaking about your work in a good way, where when they engage with you and engage with other members of your team, that those engagements demonstrate cooperative values, demonstrate values related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So even in your recruitment strategy, you do want to be thinking about, is there anything more that I can be doing as a leader, that we can be doing as a team, to ensure that equity deserving groups, when they enter this space, that they will feel welcomed, safe, that they will feel valued, that they will feel that their contribution to the board, is used to inform board governance and board decisions. So let's delve into these a little bit more, and I'll outline a few more practices, so a few more really practical things you can do in the area of recruitment when we look at people, process, and policy, and preconditions for success. So again, starting off with people, and again, this is probably the one that will take the most time if, again, you're not already engaged in networks and in a diversity of spaces where you might be able to find and build that pipeline of candidates. So it's good to start here, but again, recognize that depending on what your starting place is, this relationship building might again take that time. So where do you start? I would say you're really wanting to get as much of a sense of who is in your community, who are the communities you're trying to serve. you likely already have some networks and some connections with equity deserving groups. So I would start from that place of strength, from the existing assets that you have in terms of relationships, in terms of access to and maybe references, and where can you get sort of that a little bit of an easier introduction to community and professional groups. And sometimes it's about you and your staff team and your leadership team and other members of your group attending events that community organizations put on, or that, again, other professional groups that, again, serve equity deserving groups, that they host. Sometimes it's about you doing your networking and outreach via, again, events or networking to reach out to them and to start building those relationships. Oftentimes, you hear the term, go where they are, start that recruitment process and go to the places where, be it equity deserving groups, be it women, be it, whoever you're trying to reach out, where they go, where they convene, where they meet. And sometimes that might be at a conference, at a round table, again, at different events, at different spaces. Is it the library? Is it the libraries or the community centers? Again, so learning about the community, finding about where they gather, where they get their information. Again, you want to also engage in those spaces and engage in a way, that's, again, respectful, that is transparent in terms of being able to start from a place of you want to get to know them, and then start to talk about your work and sort of your goals and ways that they might engage. But it's always about centering the groups versus centering yourself and your own sort of strategy at the time. Likewise, if you do have strong networks and you want to continue to build those relationships, sometimes hosting webinars, hosting learning opportunities, finding ways of engaging community, engaging a diversity of people from different demographics. So again, if you're looking at youth and maybe you want some younger people on your board, what would hosting an event or hosting a learning session for youth look like? What are they interested in learning about? And so you might want to put together, again, some sort of an event, a convening opportunity where you're specifically looking at building relationships with youth, seniors, mature people, whatever, again, demographic or community expertise you're looking for. And the fourth example I have here is to outreach through a diversity of platforms, and also look at the communication and your messaging, and ensure, or do your best to ensure, that it speaks to the diversity of experiences and backgrounds, again, that you want to invite in. So definitely, the way that we might communicate with youth will be different to the way we communicate with people with disabilities, or to mature adults. So, what are the different platforms that you might want to consider? And how can you, again, build your capacity to engage in those platforms? Likewise, you're going to want to think about your language that you're using, the messaging that you're sharing, and again, how can you describe and invite in a diversity of people, again, using inclusive language, and accessible language as well. So those are, 4 things that you can think about as you build a strategy around relationship building and connections, as you build a strategy, again, when you're centering the people that you want to engage with, that you want to build trust with, that you want to identify as potential candidates for your board or your organizational teams. The next one is, again, how do we builds better processes and policies? How do we consider accessibility, inclusivity, and equity in the process that we're embarking on, and the process that we're using in terms of recruitment? So again, I have 4 ideas around this. The first one there is to review and adjust nomination and screening policies from an equity lens. So again, really important to take pause before you send out and do that outreach work. Take a pause and look at your screening policies, your nomination policies. Look at your criteria. Decide. Decide and think about non-university certifications which may be suitable for inclusion. So in lieu of degrees. So again, yes, a degree in a particular area might be beneficial, but are there non-university certifications that also might be suitable? You might look at if there are any, again, criterias or disqualifiers, such as criminal background checks. Again, are they absolutely necessary? In some cases they might be, but in some cases they might not be. So it's good also to double check that. In your nomination process and your outreach process, you might want to consider the diversity rule of 3, which is a promising practice, which encourages the recruitment of 3 members at a time. That helps with, again, building trust and connections with those 3 members. So you're bringing on 3 new members who can learn and grow with the organization. It also helps from a diversity perspective if you are able to bring in more than one person from an equity deserving group. They then can form a peer group, and again, it gives them the opportunity to not be the only one, right? Not be the only Black woman, for example, on a board. If you can bring in, be it 2 Black women or a Black woman and another woman of color, whatever combination of diversity that you can bring in, it's always good to bring not just one in at a time, but more than one. And there is, again, this rule of when you do have 3 women, or when you do have 3 Indigenous people, either First Nation, Métis, or Inuit. Again, that rule of 3, that's a promising practice. That's when, again, they feel that they have the support and that you have demonstrated that diversity is important. When again, it's not just the one person. Oftentimes, the one person is expected to speak on, the whole community, and that just doesn't work, and can often again lead to an early exit. The second point here is to create inclusive governance postings, remove application barriers, and restrictive qualifications. So again, that's the idea of making sure that, again, there are minimal or 0 automatic disqualifiers. And sometimes the language you use or the language you don't use can automatically disqualify someone, and someone will automatically disqualify themselves. So oftentimes you'll see at the end of a job ad or a volunteer ad that there's a statement, something to the effect of, we invite members of equity deserving groups, and they might list them, to apply, and they will be prioritized. The reason why that's put in there is because it's a little bit of an assurance to someone from an equity deserving group that, yes, this is a need that this organization has, that they value your experience, and that, they want you to apply. So again, sometimes if that's not included, someone might think that, again, their experience isn't wanted or isn't going to be valued in the space. Putting that statement in, as well as other things that also point towards the fact that you do want a diversity of applications. All of those things can, again, help people to not automatically disqualify themselves from putting in an application. The third point there is a reminder to, as much as possible, avoid and maybe again examine bias language that could deter diverse candidates. So again, how you're speaking about your work, how you're speaking about the skills and expertise that are needed. All of those things can again either create a barrier and or create greater accessibility. If you have lots of qualifiers regarding how many years experience is needed, that again is an example of a barrier that could be created in your communications material. And the fourth point there is be transparent, share your co-op's commitment to anti-racism, equity, and inclusion. So yeah, I think not only your job ad should reflect your commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, but your website should reflect that as well. Most people these days, that's the first thing they do. If they want to learn more about your organization, they go to the website. So what on the website also speaks to your commitment to anti-racism, equity, and inclusion. I think also having a contact person, so someone can pick up the phone and talk about the opportunity, is also really important. And that's again a place where if there are any questions, they could be answered. If anyone should ask about the entire process, and from the recruitment to the outreach, the recruitment to the if there's an interview involved, to whoever is on the nomination committee and what they're using to actually select candidates, all of that information should be transparent, and the nominating committee should know what the process is, so that again, if someone should pick up the phone and ask, that should be shared. So yeah, I think those are the main promising practices in the area of policy and process review that I wanted to touch on. Just a few more examples, maybe in terms of that point around biased language. It's also important, again, I think I mentioned this, but I'll say it again, as much as possible, that you do have a diverse nominating committee, because again, the more diversity you have in terms of people reviewing applications, the better, again, the better chance you have of removing or eliminating bias. It's about, how can we build our skills to treat, things like the name of a person, their background. How can we look at these things from in a non-biased way? And again, sometimes it does take a diversity of people to actually create that environment. So yeah, I think let's move on to the final sort of area of promising practices related to recruitment. And this one, again, is all about creating a culture of constant reflection and action, creating a culture of anti-racism, equity, and inclusion. So as you're doing this, again, it's important that as a board and or as a leader within an organization, that you have a constant eye on the organizational culture and what you're doing as a leader in terms of ensuring that everyone around the board table, everyone around your management team and your staff team, as much as possible is contributing to your organizational values related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and to actually practicing and creating that culture for inclusivity. So if you have any feedback loops, if you've done any recent surveys in these areas, if you've done offer training opportunities for your staff in these areas, all of these pieces, you can use the information that you're getting from the surveys, from the training sessions, as places and as information that you can deepen your work. So, for example, in a training session, there might be certain questions that come up. Make note of those questions, and if further work, further exploration is needed to address those questions, then it's upon you to be the champion and to investigate those. If you've done a survey recently, again, what did a staff survey say? What did a board survey tell you in terms of what's working and what's not working? And again, how can you continue to deepen your inclusivity work and your organizational culture based on what you're hearing from different surveys? If you haven't done any surveys or don't have the process or the mechanisms to gather that data or to ask for that feedback, then that could be a step in this area, right? What can you do to get that feedback from staff? And it doesn't have to be elaborate or onerous. Again, sometimes it could be done anonymously through a short survey, and or it could be done through a focus group, and or it could be done again by tagging it on to an existing learning opportunity. So there are ways to get the information, to take that pulse of what's happening in your culture. You want to do that, but you also want to do the next step of addressing any gaps or deepening the work. So really, the preconditions for success in this area is really all about ensuring that when you're inviting someone in, that the vision and the values alignment that you have, and that's noted on your website and in other documents, is what is actually happening with the organization. And how can you, as a leader and as a member of a team, contribute to that, and again, fill in any gaps. I'm just looking at the list here. So invest in ongoing learning. I spoke about that, and that should be, again, an ongoing piece that you do. I always say you need to hear and listen and stop and reflect about diversity, equity, and inclusion 3-4 times a year. Like sometimes it's, set it up maybe every quarter that you're investing in ongoing work. What we're trying to change here are the way we think, the way we act, the way we behave. And those are really hard things to hear and to do. So the constant encouragement, hearing it from different people, different perspectives, can help us to really continue on the journey and really help us to integrate the change that we want to make. Definitely explore power dynamics in meetings and decision-making processes. Again, is the way you conduct meetings, is the way you, what is the way you conduct meetings? What are you valuing? Who's being valued? Who's being privileged? Again, what are those key questions that you're constantly going to be asking yourself? Practice collective work towards inclusivity. So what might that look like? And the last point there, create accountability processes. And as I mentioned earlier, those feedback mechanisms for board and staff. So those are the 4 promising practices in the area of ensuring a really strong, inclusive culture. So I'm going to now move into another video, and this video is actually part of a video series that is made to support co-ops in achieving the 50% gender parity and the 30% of equity deserving groups on boards and in leadership teams. These videos were made in collaboration with the Women's Economic Council, the BC Cooperative Association, and the Alberta Cooperative Association as part of the 50-30 Challenge. So I will share the resource and the links to all of the videos in the resource sheet, but I'm going to show this video clip that talks about promising practices related to board nomination. It also talks about questions to consider. Again, a video for inspiration as you consider how you might change and modify your current practices.
Another tool that we've really been looking at is the board nomination process and what that looks like, because part of this video is talking about how to strengthen board and leadership, and particularly representation within those groups. So for co-ops looking to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in their boards, I would like to say to take a couple steps back first and to really look at the membership as a whole. Who are our members? What communities do they represent? Do they represent the communities that we serve overall? And if not, what can we do to be more inclusive and to have services that feel relevant to people of all identities, and particularly equity deserving groups? We're open to all. That's a very passive approach to sit back and say, hey, my door is open if you want to join. But instead, trying to take an active approach and meet people where they feel safe and engaged and show that their thoughts and perspectives are valued. So if you start by doing that, then you can look at what does our board composition look like? And an important question here, inspired by Lily Zheng's work, is do our members trust that our board is representative and accountable? And if not, that's where we have to dig deeper and to understand what the barriers are and how we can remove them. So look at nomination processes, making sure that they are accessible, that the language used is neutral and welcoming, and that we value lived experiences when selecting board members. And then also look at governance structures and decision-making processes to make sure that people that are currently serving in the board, they feel safe to show up as their genuine self. They feel safe to bring up concerns and potentially negative feedback. And because that is something that's a reputation that the members will hear about. And it's only if they feel like they will be welcome and that their diverse ideas will be heard that you will get the members interested in taking on these roles.
And in our work, we've talked about how diversity, equity, inclusion work needs to be beyond human resources, which is often where it's housed. It needs to be throughout communications, how meetings are facilitated and organized, decision making, and really diving deep that way.
Okay, so yeah, so that video again shared some additional tips, some promising practices that I shared, but again, sometimes hearing it in a different voice and in a different way can again spark new ideas. Again, I encourage you to take a look at the entire video series. They're really well done, and again, they can provide some additional insight and inspiration for your own work. So let's take another pause moment. I encourage you to pause the video and to think about all three of these areas now, and how you might include, key questions in all of these three areas. Again, maybe you want to ask yourself, what's working for you in terms of recruitment in these three areas, and maybe what you might want to explore. So what's a gap, and what there might be just one or two insights that you said, hey, maybe we can try that as well. You might want to look back at that list that you created at the top of this module to see, again, this is what's working, but how can you do it better? So maybe look back at that list, and again, looking at it from a lens of people, process, and policy, and preconditions for success. Maybe you're really good with the people part, but you need to, again, review your policies. Maybe your policies are really good, but you need to come up with a ongoing strategy to build stronger networks within community. So I would say, take the time you need, pause the video. You can also reflect on the last question here is, what additional supports might you need to change recruiting practices? So again, this is teamwork, and the more collective you can make this work, the more you can actually accelerate the work. So what other supports do you need, or might you need? So that could be another question. So yeah, I'll give you a minute, encourage you to pause the video, and then we can return for the last few slides. Okay, so I hope that that little pause and reflection maybe has given you a little bit of a roadmap in terms of one next step, two next steps that you can take um, uh, to consider with others in terms of enhancing your recruitment strategy. If not, I'm providing this slide with some additional ideas and some additional inspiration. In a previous session that I facilitated, there was a breakout room, and we asked, again, the same question that I just asked you regarding, what are you currently doing and what's working, what's not working, and then what new strategies might you consider? And so this is just a sample of ideas that they came up with. So let's review some of these. And again, I'm hoping this list and these post-its, again, provide some additional inspiration for your own work. So one of them says here, nomination committee needs to be trained and needs to rethink processes and objectives, needs to speak to those referring to members. So really great point. The nomination committee is such an important part of recruitment. And yes, they really should be grounded in ideas related to equity and inclusion. They should have a strong understanding of, again, what do these concepts mean, and how can we embed these concepts of inclusivity into our process? And as mentioned, yes, they should rethink the way they do things, right? And again, stop and ask some key questions. And finally, I love the idea that you might also have them speak to those that might be referring new members. So you'll remember that circle graph where, the board is there. You have your board committees, you have your management team, you have staff, you have members. As I said, everyone, should be aware that, we're needing new members, we're needing new board members. This is who we need, and this is who we're looking out for. So how can the nomination committee, again, orient as many people as they can in terms of the needs and the call for members that's going to be put out? Because the more people that know about what you're looking for, the better it is that you're actually going to get really, qualified candidates putting their name forward. Another point on the post note here, which we talked about, is building relationships. So again, if there's one place to start, I would say start that work of building meaningful relationships with equity deserving groups and a diversity of community members. Again, look at who are the communities you want to serve, and really do an audit in terms of how are you currently engaging with those communities. If youth engagement is important to you, there's a note there saying, you might want to look at partnerships with universities or colleges. As mentioned, depending on what demographic you want to invite in, find out where they are. If it's young people, yes, universities are a great sort of platform to engage with. If it's a specific ethnocultural group, again, where are their places of convening and of gathering? It's important to do that research and to come up with an outreach plan, and again, a building relationships plan that can be a part of your recruitment strategy. There's another point here around succession planning and the value of putting that in place with intentional recruitment in mind. So definitely, succession planning is a part of governance. So how does your succession planning also match or mirror with your recruitment plan? I think that's another practice that you can look at. Another note here, resources allocated to hiring and recruitment. So again, yes, some of this work, depending on, again, what your strategy is, might require additional resources, be it human resources and or financial resources. Either way, I think, again, it's important to consider, what supports are needed, what resources are needed, and allocate that accordingly. The need for conversations to continue about quote unquote best and quote unquote right candidate or quote unquote the right fit. We spoke about this, and again, it's so important that we review our language, we review our criteria from a perspective of accessibility, from a perspective of, again, inviting in a diversity of groups and equity deserving groups in particular. Ask yourself, is this needed? Why is it here? Is it creating a barrier, or is it actually creating a welcoming invitation to those that you want to join your organization? Interview virtually. Candidates appreciate that. Yes, sometimes it's the small things, right? Sometimes it's, again, figuring out what works best for potential candidates and seeing how you can accommodate that need. So if interviewing virtually is an option, and something you can offer, definitely that's one thing that you can do. Opening up part-time positions as well. I like this idea as well because, and one thing I think I didn't touch upon is, your pool of candidates can come from many different places and spaces, and they can engage with your organization in different ways before, joining the board. So, for example, if you have a committee, and if the committee has the criteria that it can be members from the community, sometimes that's a great way to start an engagement process with a diversity of people. Invite them onto a committee first, and then maybe, again, if you demonstrate that this is a really great place to be, maybe the next step for that committee member is to join the board. In this case, maybe open up some part-time positions, get that door open for people to engage, for you to get to know them, for them to get to know you, so that it might be an easier transition to a full-time position. So that's definitely sort of a practice we didn't speak about, but that came up here. And another thing that we didn't speak about, but a great point, is feedback from applicants and from retiring board members could inform recruiting processes. I guess we kind of spoke about it when I spoke about, the feedback and creating feedback mechanisms. I didn't necessarily offer the advice of feedback from applicants, which I think is great advice. So again, if you have a pool of applicants and maybe you're only able to invite in 2 at the moment, talk to the other applicants, right? How did the process go? Are there other areas that they might be interested in engaging? So even though they don't get a board position or a management position, can they engage with your organization in another way? And again, it is a promising practice to interview retiring board members to talk about their experience on the board and to talk about what they might suggest in terms of, enhancing practices. And the final post note there says, barriers exist throughout the entire process, so it's important to review all stages and phases, from the application to screening to the interview phase. And I think, that's a great point to end on. Again, we're trying to change our practices so that there is greater opportunity, greater equity when it comes to recruitment. So yes, I think reviewing things from point A to point Z is key. Biases and barriers, as noted, exist throughout all the phases. So again, taking that time to pause, stop, reflect, ask key questions throughout all the phases, I think is a wonderful way to integrate the practices and the values related to anti-racism, gender equity, and removal of any systemic discrimination. So I hope that those ideas that were generated by peers in your sector, again, inspire you and encourage you to do that one thing, to do that 1 or 2 things to enhance your recruitment process. And so I'll invite you now to, review your notes one more time and maybe note one next step. What is, one next step you can take towards improving your board and leadership recruitment? Lots of ideas were given here, but sometimes and oftentimes it really starts with that one next step. So I do encourage you to write that down, journal about it, and bring in and bring along other peers to help you to do this work. Thanks again for taking the time to engage in this topic and in this module, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much.